Hey there, kids. I've come home with the milk. April Fools! Oh, you get it? Because it's April 1st. Anyway, yeah. Well, okay. Anyway, instead of the milk, I come to you exhausted. I'm sick and tired of making plausible alternate history. I do my best to research and make something that fits narratively within 10-minute chunks of multi-episode long series, and I am spent. I want to go back to the good old days where my tolerance for quality content was non-existent. Those were the days, back when I didn't have to make good ideas and make them make sense. All they had to have is good vibes and follow historical memes. Alas, those days are gone. Now I'm an old man and I don't have the muscle in me to create something so terribly cursed. Instead, I will introduce you to the unholy beast of a timeline that is Ceasarreich and attempt to adjust it with my own spin. I hope you enjoy. Everybody knows Ceasarreich. What if Germany won World War I? It's its own beast of lore and definitely worth your attention. One day, a developer added an event into the game. In the event, Churchill writes an alternate history where the Entente won World War I. Now, this is what happened in our timeline. However, imagine Churchill from Ceasarreich writing about the Entente winning the First World War. He would have things like Gallipoli succeeding. It was his idea after all. Then, the rest of the intense ideas that the Entente had for carving up Germany in our history are implemented without thought or care. This event that some random developer had put into their mod has started a movement. Several other modders who saw the event got inspired and created a fully fleshed out version of that world and developed it into a mod of the same name. Following this new tradition, the Fuhrerreich developers made an event wherein Ernest Raymond writes a novel called A New Caesar, also known as Ceasarreich. The exact specifics of the event are something we'll need to explore. However, it prompted the same response that had made Fuhrerreich a reality. This needs to become a mod. We need to go deeper. There were a couple attempts to make this mod a reality, including a rebranding to Whispers of Antiquity. I was a part of one of the later attempts in 2021, and unfortunately, a significant amount of data in this iteration was lost to time. So instead, this video will be me attempting to create a semi-plausible narrative with Ceasarreich's framework, instead of trying to recapture the first or second attempt to revive it. Based off the original event, there are only a few things that are 100% established. America joins the war against the Allies, leading to their defeat. America annexes all of Canada, which would mean an independent Quebec. Germany is the victor in the Great War, with client states being carved out of Russia. Note that this doesn't include Austria-Hungary. They fall to a communist revolution, mirroring the Bolshevik one. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but this is my least favorite part of the premise. I'll explain later on, but at first, I'm going to try to make a timeline with this canned event, so let's move on. France surrenders to the Germans, and then has a civil war, which Germany helps put down, leading to France becoming a puppet of them. Britain falls to an authoritarian dictatorship, seeking to reconquer the bits of empire that it had lost following the Great War. And then our poster boy, Italy, becomes a dictatorship under Roman LARPers. They would attempt to revive the spirit of Italy by rebranding to and reconquering Rome. Their ideology would be known as antiquitarian nationalism, as similar movements start popping up in the rest of the world, wishing to either be a part of this new Rome or reshape their own destinies to suit their antiquitarian glory. And on top of all this, we need to keep in mind that this is a triple bind scenario. A what if Germany won World War I from the perspective of a person that lived in a world where Germany lost World War I, from the perspective of a person who lived in the world where Germany won World War I, but in reality Germany had lost World War I. Does that make sense? It shouldn't. To avoid getting too complicated, we will just put it in the perspective of somebody who lived in Fuhrerreich's world. My headcanon for that timeline would be that Germany loses again, but with the French and British having a Cold War. If this is something that you would like to see more about, please leave a like and let me know your interest in the comments. While these restrictions are pretty daunting, it simultaneously leaves us a lot of room to work with. By only focusing on Western and Central Europe, we have the liberty to flesh out the rest of the world with these assumptions. This video would be unlike my others. Instead of having a completed world map for us to speculate, I will instead hide unestablished nations and dynamics before explaining in detail what their political situation would be. With that out of the way, let's start with this hypothetical. If the Germans won World War I and Britain straight up collapses into dictatorship, why wouldn't the Ottomans reclaim the Khediviate of Egypt? And why not Libya, Tunis, and maybe even Algeria as well? This Ottoman Empire would be humongous, perhaps too large, but we can use this overextension to our benefit. The Sublime Porte would need to establish progressively larger and larger reforms for local autonomy, which may manifest into a sort of warlord dynamic, which each region has its own armies. This warlord aspect would allow us to weaken the Ottomans, allow for any envious rival powers to break down their state. Enter Greece. Greece hasn't been mentioned in the premise, so I get a blank check. I will have the Bulgarians achieving their Greater Bulgaria as they had wished for in World War I. The Greeks and others would participate in another Balkan war to destroy the Bulgarians. This Greece would be inspired by the antiquarian nationalists in Italy and have dreams of recapturing the glory of the Greek civilizations of old. Due to their ideological similarities and romanticization of the past, the idea of a Roman Empire being revived with the Greeks as a major part of it would be incredibly appealing. If this were a Hearts of Iron 4 mod, I would have the Bulgarian War currently progressing, with Italy significantly involved against Bulgaria. If they were to succeed, the Greek and Italian dictators would reclaim the Roman Empire by sharing power as diarchs, much like the Romans had in times of crisis in the past. This union would be incredibly unstable, and would play into the main gameplay aspect of the state, where the player would need to attempt to find a balance in the Italian and Greek constituent states that have been separate for millennia, and attempt to recombine them, despite things like separate language, alphabets, and major religions. This could be left up to the player. Do they go for a bilingual society? Do they enforce Latinization onto the Greeks? How would the Greek diarch react? Perhaps he would demand that Italy prove their loyalty to the Greeks by invading the Ottoman Empire to reclaim Constantinople. How well would they do? These questions are what seriously motivated me to work on Ceasarreich, and I hope you are enticed by these ideas as well. Like I said initially, if this were a mod, I would have the Greeks at war with the Bulgarians. But what if they lose? This would destroy the foundation of the Italian government and their ideology, giving a major opportunity for my first addition into this scenario, a Savoyard exile government in Sardinia. In lore established by the event, the Antiquarians march on Rome and demand the deposition of the monarchy. This could and should be used to our advantage, as we have them collapse into a civil war following the Savoyard refusal. Obviously, the mainland would see the Antiquarians winning, and the Savoyards in Sardinia. This would allow us to preserve the Italian navy in the statelet, setting up a potential for the Italians to Anschluss it back after gaining enough legitimacy as compared to the Savoyards. But if the Italians fail in their support of the Greeks, like mentioned before, the nation could function as a way for the player to resume the counter-revolution and reinstate the monarchy in Italy. Clearly, these Savoyards would need to be guaranteed by some foreign power in order to avoid their reconquest. I say, who better than the French? Well, initially in lore, the Germans end up economically dominating France after a failed socialist revolt. For the benefit of the greater scenario, I will have France becoming a reactionary monarchy under Action Française shortly after the revolution is put down. My reasoning is this. Would the French people seriously tolerate the humiliation of being supported by your vanquisher for 15 years without any sort of consequence? This integralist France would have Sardinia as a puppet. This Sardinia may not even claim the entirety of Italy, and only instead reclaim Piedmont, as the integralist French would wish to re-establish the Pope, and restoring Italy in its entirety may prevent France from achieving their destiny of subjugating Europe. This France would also seek to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine, and potentially the Rhine as well. This would lead to an unlikely alliance between the Italians and the Germans. In Ceasarreich's initial event, it's very explicit in its wording that Germany would be under the Hohenzollern dynasty, but I would like to introduce my first major retcon. In attempts to avoid this being Kaiserreich but silly, I'll have the German monarchy being abolished in the aftermath of the Great War. In Kaiserreich, The monarchy prevents any major movements like the sailors' mutiny in Kiel by winning well beforehand. However, in this timeline, Germany would be immediately fighting the communists in Austria-Hungary after they defeated the French and British. The idea of the monarchy surviving such a political disaster as democracy after World War I is done, okay, now fight those communists. Okay, now fight those communists is really implausible. Instead, we'll have something similar to the Kiel uprising leading to the Kaiser peacefully abdicating and allow for the establishment of a German Republic. This German Republic wouldn't be so much better than the Empire, but it does solve one major plot hole I have with the initial scenario. If the Austro-Hungarian state had fallen to communists, why wouldn't the communists in Germany manage to organize in Austria and spread the revolution to Germany? The idea that either the communists living in Austria or the German Empire would tolerate each other's existence for 15 years is seriously staggering. I can understand the apprehension. Why wouldn't we just have a communist Austria-Hungary? It's a cool idea, right? Well, imagine this. The Soviets had nearly every single one of their neighbors fight them during the revolution for whatever reason. So now imagine there's Germany, Poland, Ukraine, Romania, all these nations that are surrounding Austria-Hungary and have claims on them just don't do it or fail somehow. Let's just get it out of the way. They're going to lose, at least Austria. German communists in this time period saw Austria as a part of Germany. Thus, the motivation for the Danubian communists and German Empire to fight each other nearly to the death of their own states as a consequence makes a lot of sense to me. Therefore, something has to give. Potentially supported by the United States, the German Republic stabilizes and fights the communist uprising in Austria-Hungary head-on. Now, I have three options here. I could either have the war end as the event initially suggests, an Austria-Hungary that becomes a communist, one where the entire movement is viciously put down by its neighbors and the communist revolution is thoroughly demolished, or a sort of compromise. My proposed revision to this scenario is that the white movements bordering Germany and its new client states would allow for these regions to gain independence. Czechia becomes independent and so too Austria. But wait, Austria? Why would it be Austria? Why wouldn't it be German? Well, because Germany becomes a republic, and the remaining white movement of Austria would still be Habsburg, it would mean that Austria would not unite with Germany in 1919. There would certainly be Republican Austrians who would yearn for Anschluss, but during this war, the Austrian white movement would be thoroughly reactionary. The German Republic would hope for a referendum to succeed, but would ultimately fail as eventually, after enough blood is shed and the Great Depression begins to present itself in the victorious powers, the Hungarians, Slovakians, Croatians, and Bosnians would remain communist. Austria would feel incredibly betrayed by the Germans and Americans, who essentially fought only to prop up buffer states between themselves and the communists. Thus, they would adopt integralism as a way to enforce Austria as a nation separate from the Germans, and in the event that the Italians or Germans are taken out by their allies of France, they would be able to reclaim the glory of their old empire. Now, with these changes to the timeline, we have a geopolitical scenario which is reminiscent of Ceasarreich, but with a lot more dynamism that we can play with. The Italians and Germans would have a good reason to be friendly with one another, as they both share the threat of the French and the Austrians. We could see a Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression pact between these two powers, as Italy claims Austrian land, and they split France between the north and south. This solution also manages to preserve one of the more important aspects of what makes Ceasarreich, the communists in Hungary. These Hungarian communists would seek to consolidate and spread the revolution to their neighbors. In order to do so, they would seek to spread communism to the Balkans. Romania would need to have been defeated for this scenario to work. They had invaded Transylvania to reclaim their Greater Romania in our history, but in this timeline, we'll have the Romanians' offense collapsing due to an attempted communist revolution in their state. While they may not be successful, the offensive would need to halt with the cessation of hostilities. This leaves the Balkans in a sort of situation that would play into the Balkan War. Following the outcome of this war, Bulgaria could have its own communist revolution, allowing for Danubia to integrate them into their union and enact its advantage on Serbia and Romania, annexing them into their communist state once the time is right. Seeing the potential for the Danubians to destroy Serbia, the Serbians could sign a deal with the Roman diarchy, allowing for them to split Albania between themselves and potentially annex Montenegro as a means to improve their chances against Danubia. With this dynamic occurring in the Balkans, we allow for an organic transition of alliances between several different groups, and give the Roman diarchy a genuine chance to reclaim the glory of the Roman Empire. With that being said though, let's start to look at the rest of the world. With the German Empire establishing several client states, the sudden collapse out of monarchy would allow for these states to truly be independent, and not simply puppets. This would be especially true for Estonia and Latvia, who would successfully demolish the United Baltic Duchy. With the Danubians fighting the Germans, the Polish and Ukrainians would be able to split Galicia-Lodomeria between themselves and keep it secure following peace with the Danubians. So what kind of government would Russia have? Following the pattern of the triple bind scenario so far, it would be safe to assume that this Russia would be some form of white movement. But what kind of white movement? Perhaps, despite the usual trend of invoking every nation who suffered defeat in the Great War of radical ideology, let's make them democratic. While they may be democratic, they would still be Russians. So they would attempt to conquer Ukraine and Belarus when the time is right. But why would they do this? Well, in our history, the Brest-Litovsk Agreement was signed between the Bolsheviks and the Germans. The provisional Russian government was not involved. This would therefore imply that the provisional Russian government would not see the treaty as legitimate. But why would the whites win and not the Bolsheviks? Well, in my opinion, with the rise of the Danubian communists happening at the same time as the Bolsheviks in our history, it has me believe that this would have been due to Lenin helping start a revolution there instead of Russia, like in our timeline. This would mean that the communist movement in Russia would have different leadership. Perhaps Trotsky attempts his own revolution after the Danubian one, but fails. This would give us a reasonably democratic Russia. If it turns out that the Danubians are having a hard time being able to be communist in a really reactionary Europe, it would make sense to have Russia be communist. Well, we've certainly gotten a little sidetracked. As you can see, the dynamic in Europe is very compelling. The only two nations that have established canon in this event are the British, who fall to a military dictatorship, and the USA that annexed all of Britain's North American holdings. While it was very easy for me to explain in depth all the details that would make a scenario like this interesting, I'm having a difficult time finding a way to balance Britain in such a way that would allow them to continue being a force to be reckoned with, while allowing for the USA to be an important part of geopolitics, but still weak enough to not make it too boring. I really want to avoid giving the USA a civil war. I personally find Ceasarreich's civil war to be a little forced. What I can imagine is that with enough time, the British may gain the confidence to invade North America, and when they do, they could trigger Canadian partisans. It very well could be that this British government would seek to enact a vengeance on the USA for declaring independence. Regardless of motivation, in order for Britain to be strong enough for such an invasion to be possible, we would need them to maintain a majority of their colonies and dominions, which may be unreasonable given the utter victory that a German-American combined force would imply. Now all we have left is the USA and their foreign policy. Call me boring, but I see America remaining stable and pursuing a foreign policy similar to our timeline. They have gained a significant amount of territory and are potentially content with their manifest destiny. Any foreign engagements seek to threaten destabilization and the integration of these new territories. Perhaps the USA may seem to find an ally in the democratic Russians against the rising power in Asia, whether that be Japan or China, and would much rather focus on truly securing the entirety of America with the Monroe Doctrine, which spans the entirety of the Americas. This could potentially cause Mexico to be a favorable ally for any anti-American power. We could ensure Mexico's fall to socialism. Or perhaps the antiquarian nationalists of the country would adopt Aztec traditions. Some final notes about the scenario. Antiquarian nationalism is a pretty interesting ideology, but one of the problems that Fuhrerreich had is that Volkism wasn't defined beyond Germany. The ideology made a lot of sense for Germany. It didn't make a lot of sense for everyone else. It sort of became a fourth way beyond fascism. What I would suggest is that antiquitarian nationalism be a sub-ideology of a different ideology, and that ideology be something like esoteric nationalism. When I kept writing antiquitarian nationalism, I kept writing instead something like that. Esoteric nationalism, romanticist nationalism, something that is clearly hey, this is crazy nationalism. And then for Asia, I didn't really have any ideas here. This is off script, but if you have something like Russia and the USA being allies, you would need to either make China really powerful or Japan. I personally think Japan, they had a lot of attempts to create little buffer states between themselves and Russia after Russia had its civil war. It could make it so that you had that dynamic between Russia wanting to conquer land off Japan. Maybe America wants to keep China around if they don't like them invading China. I don't know. I just try not to overthink Asia. Fuhrerreich, I don't remember how many times they try to rework Asia. Sometimes the simpler option is better, is all I'm saying. Something cool I thought would be good for a conflict that I only just realized now in editing is having Brazil be something that the Portuguese could try to take over. In Whispers of Antiquity, I checked their Reddit, and it seems like they had them be integralist, so we could do something like that. Yeah, oh, and then Spain, Civil War. Just give them a faction for every faction in Europe. Yeah, it's basically the amount of lore people do for Spain. Well, that's certainly enough speculation. What I thought would be a small video recounting my sense of work on an old project quickly turned into me accidentally creating a, in my opinion, reasonable scenario that could revive the old concept of a Ceasarreich mod. I would love to see a Project Stresa mod, but I would also like to reach out to the old Ceasarreich developers. If this video inspired you, please use my ideas as a baseline for you to revive your project. I would love to see what you come up with. Anyway, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I had a blast writing this, even though I may have lost some sanity in the process. With that being said, it's your LoreDad. Stay good, be safe, don't take candy from strangers. Hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.